Interesting that that area of childbirth seems to be the area that is least moving towards Western medicine. You know, I'm also a nurse. I'm a nurse too, and taught Lamaze for many years. And then I went, and I had a lull as I went into other things, and I went back into teaching childbirth education just a few years ago, and it was shocking that women seem to be operating out of fear. It seemed to be fear-driven, but that the majority of them plan to have to use all that was available, to use definitely the anesthesia that's available, to possibly have the C-section, to definitely be induced, and that's worldwide, by the way. I just wrote an article about this that's coming out in Mountain Astrologer about the shift in childbirth practices. So it's one area where women are not going towards Western medicine or allopathic medicine.
Not only choosing for the deliveries and things, but they're conceiving. I was shocked at how they conceive now, that they have in vitro, and they don't even wait for the natural way of conceiving. That really astounded me. And then they get pregnant with multiple babies and then eliminate however many that they didn't want. And I was like, wow, because I'm like you, I'm with the natural way. So it's very fascinating. And again, I think that's from being fear-based again and not trusting. And I think trust is huge all the way around in this time right now, is that we're not trusting ourselves. We're not trusting the doctors anymore. We're not trusting the media, whatever. We're not in trust. And so it's forcing us to go into trusting ourselves, which is huge. Really.
Yeah, I think that segues with what I was thinking of your question. And what I'm seeing with clients is that there's a core ambivalence around trusting the self and around feeling. You know, that's where medication comes in. I've got people who definitely yearn not to be on medicines or not to be numbing themselves through addiction, but there's this core ambivalence around living in a world that's moving so fast, you know, surrounded by even pop psychologies that says, you know, you're supposed to just do affirmations and think good thoughts and you should be happy all the time. And we live in a culture where there's this pressure to be happy all the time. And, you know, the kind of journey that, you know, is truly healing is being willing to go inside and to feel your feelings and to have the patience to go into the depths of your psyche and, you know, retrieve these parts of your soul that were lost. And there's a tremendous yearning for that. And yet there's this incredible ambivalence because there's so much pressure to just get over it, you know, and feel better. And that's where pharmacology comes in and addictions come in. So I see people really struggling with that right now. And that's something that's showing up a lot.
You know who talks about that is Martin Prechtel, who's trained as a shaman in Guatemala, and he talks a lot about grief. And one of the things he talked about in this little village where he lived, when someone would die or a child would die or, you know, their husband or wife would die, how that person was just allowed to go totally into their grief. And if they got drunk or whatever, and if they were just, you know, completely fell apart, and people would just have total compassion. And, you know, if you found the guy dead drunk on your porch, you'd drag him inside and wash him off and feed him and, you know, give him a little love. And then if he went off and got drunk the next day, you didn't judge him. But you just allowed the grief, whatever it was, whether it was alcohol or just crying or not being able to do anything. It was supported. And he talks about how in this culture we have this idea that, you know, like in a week, you should just be over it, like this, you know. And I think we have that idea, like we can't really, well, to let ourselves feel the feelings, but like for like a couple days, okay, it's a weekend. I can feel my feelings till you know, 5 o'clock on Sunday, and then I got to get my life back together for Monday morning. And that's not really authentic. And until we can allow ourselves to really go into that, I had an experience of being at a Martin Prechtel writing workshop, not thinking this is going to be shamanic, you know, Night of the Soul stuff, and I was going through a breakup, and I ended up going to this well of grief, and I really thought I was never going to come out of it, and it lasted for a couple of weeks, and I got this terrible vertigo. I really couldn't do anything because I couldn't walk, and I just cried and cried and cried. I thought, how can anyone have this many tears? And at the time, it was almost terrifying because I thought, what if I never come out of this? But there was a part of me, like, you know, my spirit guides were just like, you just have to be with this, and I just let it be what it was, and then eventually I came out of it, and I was really grateful because it just allowed me to see how much grief there can be. And I think that's part of what's going on in the world too. People have a certain level of grief, like we were talking about the planet being polluted, and Oliver was talking about, and that grief that we all feel, like the grief that people are feeling towards the Gulf and the oil and on all these different levels, and yet we don't give ourselves permission to feel the grief. So we end up, getting into drugs or alcohol or antidepressants or workaholism or whatever it is, so that we don't have to feel that kind of grief that's coming up because we don't know what to do with it. And as a culture, we don't even have a way of allowing it at least in the U.S., I think. I mean, there's certain microcosmic groups, that where they do grieve, but they're small groups. But as a culture, no.
Yeah, this is what I see, like in when what both you and Rich were talking about, is that I see that everything needs to be so quick. Let's get the gas quick, let's get the money quick, let's get the, everything's very quick, even our actions with the phone, with greeting one another. And I think that's because we've so much shifted away from the earth and nature, in that down to earth. And I see a very big difference between Australia and America, quite a big difference, because over there we're from the land down under. And so it really is down and under. Really there's a strong foundational base that's very grounded, and people, when they're feeling things, they really speak from what is their truth, no matter what. And I found that a little difficult here. I've had to really monitor myself, and even so, I'm not monitored at all, am I? But what I'm saying is that because of the quickness and looking at the credit card and how people live on this false pretense or this false security that I have enough, when it's really not even theirs to have in that way. And I find this is a very big obese problem in America. It's obesity. Everything's quick, everything's big, everything's large, everything's more than. And just to bring it in and down, bring it all in and down. I say this to many of my clients. I would give them a mudra, give them an exercise to bring it all in and down, to ground their energy, because otherwise it's spun out. It's very much spun out, and we need to lasso that energy back in and harness it back in to something more real, something more authentic, something more natural, something more still and meditative. And I think that we've gone way out of line from being in nature and watching the clouds and how they form shadows on the rocks, and watching and stopping to smell the roses, and really being blessed by the water that we drink. These sort of things, I think we're all returning back to that because there's nowhere else to go.
I think it's interesting, and we're going to take a break in a couple of moments, but we've heard this fast and everything's planned, even now conception planned, this is planned, that's planned, fast, and here we're blessed, and it was shared with me, a very spiritual thing to do is one thing at a time. So one thing at a time. Now imagine going into your job interview in this modern world, and what are you going to do for me? Well, I'm actually going to do one thing at a time. In this multitasking, I'm not sure that would go over particularly well. Why don't we take like a 5-minute break or so?